All right, so we are going to move into stage one of the revolution today. So the start of the French Revolution. So you need to pull up the notes that we started the other day. You should be here in this blue section for stage one. Okay, so remember, we're breaking down the revolution into 4 stages. So we are at the beginning. Previously, we talked about the causes, we talked about economic issues in France and the crazy spending of the monarchy, the political issues and instability that the monarchy was experiencing, and the social inequality that existed because of the way that France was structured. And so all of these underlying issues, pretty much it's causing unrest in France. So now we are at the point in 1789 where we have got to come up with a solution. So that is where we are starting. So when we were back in Unit 3, we discussed the formation of the French government and how it was structured. And the French government is an absolute monarchy, we said, right? So the monarch has absolute power, no restrictions on their power. They also have a representative body of the 3 estates known as the Estates General. Okay. It's really important to note that even though this representative body exists, the absolute monarch is not required to meet with the Estates General. So by the time we get to May of 1789, it's been a while since the French monarch has actually bothered to meet with the Estates General since 1614. So it's been over 100 years since the Estates General has met. But because of all of those underlying issues that we were talking about, finally Louis XVI decides that it's time for an Estates General meeting. Okay. However, there are some issues with the Estates General in the way that it is set up. Each estate, so each social class, the clergy, the nobility, and the third estate, the commoners, everyone else, gets 1 vote. Okay. However, there's this issue that the third estate, because it's 97% of the population, it's a majority of the population, really should have more than 1 vote. And usually when they voted on policies, they faced this issue of being outvoted by the first and second estate 2-1. So let me give you an example. France right now is in economic turmoil. Okay. One of the solutions to solving some of those economic problems would be to raise taxes and actually impose taxes upon the first and second estate. Well, when the first and second estate vote, they're clearly going to vote no, we're not paying taxes. So that's 2 votes no. And then, of course, the third estate is going to say, yes, I think that you should vote, or I think that you should pay taxes. So they're going to be outvoted almost every time 2-1. So really having 1 vote puts the third estate at a disadvantage because they are the lower portion of the population, yet they are a majority of the population and should really have votes that are representative of their particular population, if that makes sense. Okay, so really we should have more than 3 estates to kind of balance this out, but you get what I'm saying. So this is the issue with the Estates General meeting. So it's not really going very well, especially for the third estate. It's hard for them to obviously agree on some sort of solution for this economic issue or the economic issues, I should say, that France has. So in May of 1789, due to the unfair representation in the Estates General, the Third Estate decides to form their own representative assembly known as the National Assembly. So this is a completely separate body, separate from the Estates General, specifically for the Third Estate to demand representation. And sort of when this is formed, Louis XVI is just kind of ignores it. It obviously is formed, but for him as an absolute monarch and also being incompetent, this doesn't really necessarily mean that, the National Assembly is going to be effective in any way. But in June, when these meetings of the Estates General are going on, when the third estate shows up to the Estates General meeting that's occurring, they find that the doors are locked and themselves to be locked out. So obviously, if they're not in the meeting, they can't vote. They cannot partake in this particular meeting. So they decide that they are going to host their own meeting by the National Assembly on a local tennis court. Okay. Can't meet at the Estates General meeting. Let's go to a local tennis court. Here, they make what is known as the tennis court oath. You absolutely have to know what the tennis court oath is. You also need to know what the National Assembly is. But the Tennis Court Oath is really important because this is where the third estate finally bands together and decides that they are not going to disband. The National Assembly, the third estate, the representative body for the third estate, is not going to break apart until they write a new constitution, and the constitution is then recognized by the monarch. So King Louis XVI, finally, now that the National Assembly is making demands, tries to force them to disband, but fails. So this is one of the first signs that really his power is waning. But Louis XVI can't really force the National Assembly to disband. These are the masses of the people. So this is kind of one of those, ongoing issues, is that the National Assembly is still in formation, it's still in existence, and these are the beginnings of revolutionary movements. Okay, so the Tennis Court Oath, they agree that they're going to write a constitution for the third estate. Okay, so this is a picture of the Tennis Court Oath. All right, so after the Tennis Court Oath, we're going to see that the king is sort of forced to recognize the National Assembly. He doesn't really, again, take it seriously. He is kind of doing this for matters of appearance. But because this is obviously a threat to the old regime, the traditional, ways of France, he increases the military presence in Paris, in the capital, which, if you're living in Paris, right, the increased military presence is probably making you nervous. And along with that, Louis XVI dismisses Jacques Necker, which is a really popular official amongst the commoners. He was trying to make economic reforms that would favor the third estate. And so when Louis XVI dismisses him, this really infuriates the third estate even more, now that they have, made this oath to write a new constitution. And then in response to that, the king kind of threatens them with the military. So this obviously angers the masses, and the peasants start to gather weapons on July 14th in 1789 and a mob forms. But here's the thing. They need gunpowder for these weapons. Now, gunpowder is known to be stored in the Bastille, or the Bastille. It is a prison for political prisoners, so people that the monarchy deems political prisoners, people who are generally guilty of treason, etc. But this is where the military keeps all their gunpowder. So the peasants and their mob, they march to the Bastille, and they storm it. They end up tearing it down brick by brick. So obviously all the prisoners inside, gone. They've also killed some military members in the process. And so basically we have an all-out fight between the French military and the third estate. But what this tells us is that the peasants have, one, officially started the revolution, because this is official aggressive action. They have torn down the Bastille, which was a symbol of the monarchy's power. It was a symbol of the monarchy's oppression, because it was for, again, political prisoners. And now that the prison is gone, this is signaling to us that the monarchy and its power is weakening. So by tearing down the Bastille, the revolution has officially started. And if Louis XVI didn't know before, right, the National Assembly and the Third Estate is not going to stop until their demands are met. So July 14th today is their sort of Independence Day in France, Bastille Day. You've probably heard of it before, but it is their version because it is the official start of the revolution. It's the official, symbol of the French fighting back against. Okay, so now that the National Assembly has actually taken action, there's a couple of things that occur. In August of 1789, so the next month, they issue a decree, an official order that abolishes the old feudal system. Okay, the feudal system is something that has been in place in France since the Middle Ages. So once you get rid of the old feudal system, you're essentially getting rid of, the old regime. And later on August 27th, they also write the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. So for the Third Estate, this is really important too, because the rights of man and citizen grant rights to all men and declared all of them equal to one another. So basically saying that the old regime, these old class systems don't exist. We're all equal. We all have the same rights. And so notice too that it's also all men. So it doesn't necessarily address women, unfortunately. But this is important because this would reflect, again, Enlightenment ideas. So a lot of these movements in France are going to be reflected upon, or movements in France during the Revolution are going to be reflective of Enlightenment ideas. So they get rid of this old feudal system, they get rid of this old regime, they give rights to all men from the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. Like you have the right to be innocent until proven guilty. And again, echoing several ideas like Locke's. And then in October, we face another issue. There is a bread shortage and there is also inflation. Bread is really expensive. And for the French, bread is a majority of their diet. When there's a shortage of bread, and then there's also inflation, which means the price of bread is really high, but the value of their currency is really low. The women in Paris, specifically these women who are working in the fish market, this is where kind of the march starts. But the whole point of that is to prove to you that these are common women. They march to Versailles due to this bread shortage and due to the inflation. They're hungry. They can't feed their families. And so what this ends up causing is other people to join in. And so this mob marches, 12 to 14 miles to Versailles and completely storms Versailles, tears open the gates and beheads some of the royal guards, and almost actually kills Marie Antoinette. She barely gets away. She makes it to the king's quarters for safety, but the mob forces the royal family to come back to Paris, basically as prisoners of the new revolutionary government. So the royal family, for the first time in years, has been forced to leave now their palace. They are in Paris, basically just, held captive of the revolutionary government. And in September, a new constitution is written in 1791. So obviously 2 years have passed since this has happened, but a new constitution is written that then further limits the power of the king, which reflects Montesquieu's ideas. So after stage one of the revolution, we see that the third estate got some representation. They limited the power of the king. They officially started a revolution. They have taken the royal family as prisoners, and they have a new constitution that, again, limits the power of the king and creates basically 3 branches of government, a system of checks and balances. So when we look at the success of stage 1, okay, remember what the third estate, what caused the third estate to start this revolution. They were social inequality, right? They wanted equal rights. They wanted equal representation in government. There were economic issues. There were political issues with the king and his unlimited power. So they actually accomplished a lot within this first, couple of years from 1789 to 1791. They successfully limited the power of the king with the Constitution of 1791. They created 3 branches of government. They got their representation, the National Assembly, and they've also created a new revolutionary government. The National Assembly also wrote a new constitution, like we said, 1791, and all men were granted rights. So the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen give all men rights. And like we said, it doesn't necessarily include women, but it does reflect it does reflect Enlightenment ideas. So overall, stage 1 is pretty successful. Okay. So I want you to add that into your notes. Like overall, stage 1, pretty successful. They're accomplishing a lot of their goals. So really our question is, where can the revolution go from here? So we're going to pick up with stage 2 tomorrow. You guys are going to do an activity that goes over the different parts of stage 1.